So remote collaboration is not like this crazy new idea, but a lot of people have been dumped into it.
Welcome to Listen In. I'm James Wiley, a strategist at Space Camp, and this week we'll be talking to Charlie Fink about his latest book, Remote Collaboration, Virtual Conferences, and the Future of Work.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me. Well, the project started when my Chapman University class called Landscape of XR, which sort of was a study of the industry, ethical considerations, social considerations, that sort of thing. And it was a fairly academic seminar for mostly upperclassmen. And we were quarantined starting on March 5th. So we were about a third of the way through our semester. The school allowed the students to take home the Oculus Quests.
Right.
They were taking out from the equipment room periodically, but I felt like just intuitively, in a crisis, there is opportunity. So once I got home with the Quest, it was sort of now what? You have to do a new syllabus and you have to rethink your lesson plan in the context of being quarantined. And it was obviously apropos for a class that was about virtual and augmented reality, because the most defining quality of VR is presence, being present with another person when you are distant. That's what it was invented for. So I don't have to explain to you while we're doing this Zoom interview
Right.
the value of presence. So that was a big win for VR, by the way, because it was very hard to explain what VR was for other than gaming and pretending to fly an airplane.
Right.
So, but now I don't have to explain to you the value of being present and how much more engaging that would be than a Zoom call. Now, a Zoom call with 2 people is a little different than a Zoom call with 8
50
people.
people. Yeah.
But once we get down to chiclet size, its value over a voice call is very minimal. So they had the Quests, and we had Zoom, which of course was where the majority of our discussion took place. And I think we thought, well, how are we going to do the class? What are we going to study? Are we going to visit VR sites together and then talk about it? Are the students going to download a lot of or buy a lot of VR experiences? Because mostly 360 videos and games.
Right.
So it's not a whole lot to talk about. So we decided we should do something active. And I thought, well, let's try and do the things together that we would do if we were a remote team from a company. And then we started to try things, and it was like, oh, well, this is pretty cool, because you're not often going to get 9 people together to go pound on a site. And the great thing about them being college students is they were completely fearless with the medium. So we'd show up in a site like Glue, and they would find the menu immediately and then press every button.
Right.
And I mean, we broke stuff, we discovered things, but it was great. We got into Spatial. People made little cars and pretended to sit in them. And, so those are Glue and Spatial are 2 examples of collaboration sites. We finally just did 83 of them, but we actively looked at 120 of them. Most of, it's still, we didn't exclusively look at VR and AR sites.
Right.
We looked at all the video conferencing sites. You have to meet people where they are, and Zoom is a stretch for a lot of people.
Right.
So this is reality. But I think increasingly, specifically for knowledge workers, you will see people going in and out of VR and Zoom and asynchronous platforms, which have become so important to forget remote work, just everyday work.
Yeah, definitely.
Trying to replace the cascade of emails I used to get as an executive in the old days. It's a better way of doing things rather than your email box becoming this tremendous and oppressive to-do list.
Right. And you talk a little bit in the book about how kind of just being in the presence of other people impacts the quality of your work.
Well, there's yes and no, right? There are companies, I'll tell you an anecdote that illustrates this. An old friend of mine from way back when, before computers were at the center of American culture, was working for a computer company called Spatial Systems.
Okay.
And he was in suburban Boston, and Spatial was purchased probably about 20 years ago now by Cisco. And he was put on a team with that was run out of Argentina that included engineers in the Netherlands and in the Pacific Northwest. And they met in the 15 years he was on this team exactly in person exactly once. But they managed to build some significant products and service some significant products for Cisco effectively. And
Right.
that was before Zoom and that was before Discord.
Hmm.
They would use conference calls and internal tools that Cisco had developed. So remote collaboration is not like this crazy new idea,
For sure.
but a lot of people have been dumped into it. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages, right? The advantage of remote work is you reclaim all that commuting time.
Absolutely.
And the disadvantage is if you have kids, you're dead
Right.
because you suddenly have to become, I mean, if you're a parent, you're a pretty good multitasker already,
Right, but
but
there's always surprises that come up, so you have to be prepped and ready for anything that might come at you.
it demands a lot more flexibility. Uh, and some workplaces are better about that than others. But the truth is, most of the time we spend at the office working inefficiently compared to what we can do at home.
Right.
But we do miss the social thing. So, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg said that all the innovation happens in the hallway, all the execution happens in offices.
Hmm.
So if you get rid of the hallway, you're just a bunch of maintainers, and you're going to get disrupted because you've you know taken the dressing out of the salad, so to speak.
Got it.
Um, I think there's another cut at that. I'm not positive that's true. I think once you establish a basis of trust with somebody, you can collaborate remotely. So that's, I don't want to make any absolute statements. Different verticals are different, different people are different.
Sure.
But the issue is if you're a knowledge worker and you want to get promoted, remote is horrible for you because it's always based on face time with the boss, familiarity, observation, repetition. I mean, these are not things that are native to online. Those are
Right.
things that are native to in person. So what replaces that? I mean, I'm not sure how you replace that. And in big companies, there's succession issues all the time, large and small. Those are some disadvantages, but clearly many, if not most, businesses that are based on knowledge workers, well, like your business, for example,
Hmm.
will have different offices than we have today. I think they will be offices where we come together at certain times for certain things, but people aren't commuting the way they do now. At like everybody gets on the train at 7:30 and 5:30. It's not going to be like that anymore, or at least it'll only be like that 2 days a week.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, and
so
that's something you also mentioned in the book that I thought was interesting. This isn't the death of the office place. It's just kind of a transitional period where people are working more from home and being more productive, and then coming together to share that collaboration and
I
make
think
things
it'll
happen.
be the infrequency of the office, right? I
Right.
mean, that's how companies are going to suddenly compete with each other is how much face time they have. Look, I think it's important in companies where you're doing rapid iteration, like an agency,
Hmm.
right? To be proximate, even though the work could be done distantly.
Right.
Um, but that's a creative agency. We're not managing a supply chain. You hear all these people talking now about leaving Silicon Valley for that reason, right? So if I'm only going to be at work once a week, why do I have to live in a place where I have to pay $4 million for 1,200 square foot house when I could live in 3 hours away from here in a $4 million ranch that's got a giant mansion on it and horses and everything. So
Right.
like which is more valuable? So I think you'll see a lot of that, right? People won't mind driving 2 or 3 hours
If
because they're
it's
only going to
just
do it one day a week.
Yeah, yeah, it makes a big difference on how and how we work and where we can work from. There was something else I caught in your book that thought was interesting was about product roadmaps and feature sets.
Yes.
Um, I was hoping you could elaborate a little bit on that to kind of give people an idea of, as you mentioned already, the feature sets aren't fully fleshed out for a lot of these products. So kind of set expectations of what people should look for and how they should approach these different collaboration tools.
Well, I mean, let's start out with Zoom and what's good about Zoom, because in any collaboration tool, whether it's a VR based collaboration tool or a desktop-based or a smartphone-based collaboration tool, you still need the same basic building blocks.
Right.
Um, screen sharing, as I said at the beginning of our conversation, is probably the most important quality. And let's not forget ease of use. The more friction that a platform presents to the user, the less they're going to be inclined to use it. Zoom, to a lot of people, it's not. I think the interface is very easy to use and obvious.
Right.
You look down at the bar, can change the view. But a lot of people don't click all the buttons, I guess. But I'm clicking the video camera. I can choose, any virtual background, right? You're
Right.
looking at one virtual background. Here's another. And I bop around. These are all different sites that we visited.
Oh,
We
nice.
were um, when we were reviewing all the options in the field. But so screen sharing would be one thing, right? You
Hmm.
need to see some part of your existing desktop,
Right.
right? So you need to bring your desktop into the simulation, whether you're in VR. If the advantage of AR, of course, is that your desktop is actually in front of you.
Right. And in any situation, no matter where you are, you could
Right.
have your
Your
virtual
laptop or
desktop.
your phone is there, and you can see it because it's see through.
Right.
In VR, obviously, you can bring in your desktop and you can, bring up spreadsheets and documents, but you can't type. Right?
Right.
The not typing thing in VR is a problem. Now, most of them have found ways for you to draw and annotate.
Right.
But you'd want the room we were collaborating in to be persistent, right? You'd want it to be there tomorrow, so to speak.
Hmm.
You'd want to take pictures and possibly videos, right? Because I love that in Silicon Valley, the HBO series, whenever they
Oh, right.
do something on the whiteboard, everybody whips out their camera.
Yep. And that's how most office spaces are, because
Right.
once it's wiped, you don't have it anymore, right?
So you'd want to do that in the virtual space as well.
Yeah, makes total sense.
You see behind me post-it notes. You'd
And that,
want to be able to spawn windows, right? All those pictures back there are JPEGs, but they could be videos,
mhm.
right? They could be web pages.
Right. And then you can have everybody collaborating together, sharing what they've found and coming together through these
Right.
tools.
So everybody should be able to bring documents into the room and share them with other people. We should be able to bring in 3D objects into the room.
Hmm.
That's one of the problems with Zoom. Again, I said earlier, it's very hard. Engagement on Zoom is very difficult.
Right.
Also, it puts you in front of the biggest distraction machine ever invented by man. And it
Exactly.
puts some old geezer in there for 2 hours blabbing away. And you just want to put it on mute and play Fortnite. That's why by the end of the semester, I was like, no, nobody's turning off their screen out of respect. You're leaving your camera on
And
out
I
of
think
respect.
that, and that plays a big part too. If you know you're on camera, you're going to be paying more attention because you're
Yes and no, but it's hard for me to look at them and the camera at the same time.
right.
And because the screens are, I mean, I know they're looking at their smartphones, but
Right.
at least I'm boxing it a little bit.
Sure.
And I don't blame them. And if I were them, I'd be doing the exact same thing. That's how I know that they're doing.
And so how does that differ from I haven't actually personally tried many of the collaboration tools per se. I've done several VR worlds such as VR chat
Yeah.
and beyond, but are there any big differences that jumped out to you when you were in a virtual reality or augmented reality collaboration room as opposed to something like Zoom or Google Meet?
Uh, well, sure. I mean, being present with people is very, very different. It's not exactly like it would be in real life, but it's not anything like Zoom.
Right.
One interesting thing that I did, and I did this in my talk at AWE, is I did the talk as an avatar inside of VR. But because I could bring a browser in, I was able to do a Zoom call. So I was an animated, but here's the thing: I was in a magic place, right? I could do impossible things,
Yeah.
right? Which
Right.
of course you can't make your head disappear. You
Right.
can't pull, a rabbit out of your mouth, but I could do all those things. I didn't. I was doing,
Right.
weightless balls, but I could have done those things if I had
Right.
worked with a developer and a graphic designer for a couple of weeks because I was in magic place where anything is possible. So
Yeah.
I think that's really exciting. People aren't going to do it. People are going to do it kind of once in a while as a joke.
Exactly.
The reason is there's too much friction. It's too hard. It's a pain in the ass. Anything that requires me to mess around with my gaming PC, and you have to do the gaming PC because it is a pretty high bandwidth and graphically intense, to bring a browser into virtual reality. That is
Right.
hard. Only a couple of companies have done that. That is actually one of the harder things to do.
Oh, it makes sense. I had another question about when you guys were doing all of your research. Was there anything that was really illuminating or unexpected that you found while putting this book together and looking at all these different collaboration and tools?
Yeah, I was shocked at how many companies are in this space already.
I was pretty
To say
impressed
nothing
with.
of all the people that have been rushing in the past 3-4 months,
Mhm.
but I was truly surprised at how big this was, and the scale of it. I mean, 85 companies. It's partly need. A lot of companies are pivoting, right? They need to find a business model. They need to find a need. Now, in terms of surprises, in terms of sites, a lot of sites that had been in the works for a long time either launched right away or accelerated their launch,
Yeah.
or were still in beta. And some of those included Sync from Vive. I mean, unfortunately, it's for PC VR again, so you can't. You can do WebXR with the PlayStation, but
Hmm.
you can't download a big ass app from HTC on a PlayStation.
Right. Right. And what
So
about something like Quest? Does that work on
in,
self-contained VR device?
increasingly, people are making the Quest compatible in anticipation of there being some Quests for people to buy.
Right.
And I don't even know really how many more Quests are going to get out there before they're just ready to do the next generation thing at this
Gotcha.
point. So we'll see. The Quest is wonderful because it is, you put it on and you're in VR, and
Right.
its interface is superb.
It takes away a lot of the barriers that PC VR has.
Less friction. Less
Yeah.
friction.
I did have another question, and this might be a little bit biased, and I know there's. It really depends on what your purpose is and what you're using the tool for. You have a lot of education and training tools listed, but were there any collaboration tools that really stood out to you and your team as being more effective than others, and what features of those tools made them stand out to you?
Well, we really like Spatial. Spatial is rich in features. It can accommodate a lot of simultaneous avatars. They're working on a web-based version, and they're just quickly adding to their product roadmap. They don't have an active browser. They thought again, inside of a company, you make a product roadmap based on what you think is the most important.
Uh,
That's quite a good company. There was another company called Arthur that we liked a lot. Again, less friction with these guys. It worked, right? It just has to work.
right.
And a lot of platforms have friction. Verbella was one that's particularly good for conferences. There's a real estate company, EXP Realty, which has 27,000 agents all over the world, and they exist entirely on Verbella. There is no headquarters. Once a year, they have an annual meeting someplace nice, and otherwise the company is completely remote.
Wow, that's impressive.
And I'll tell you something else. The guy who owns Verbella, who owns EXP Realty, which is $1 billion public company, liked Verbella so much as a platform that he bought the company.
Well, there you go.
So
That's cool.
everybody has got the same things on the product roadmap,
Right.
but
The key features.
slightly different orders, and some are having more success than others. Sound is an issue across the entire industry because graphics are done locally. All your broadcasting is telemetry,
Ah.
and
Huh.
voice is a separate packet, and it's hard to compress voice. Most people don't, and that's what puts limits on the number of people that you can have in a simulation.
Got it. That's interesting. I did not know that was a big barrier as well.
Voice is hard. You would think, because it's a thing that's expected to just work.
Right.
You would be surprised that it's that hard, and it's hard for Zoom, by the way.
Huh.
Because Zoom is Netflixing us as we talk right now, right? I mean, I'm being throttled, you're being throttled based on changes in bandwidth, which are going on throughout this conversation, but we're not experiencing any of them.
Yeah.
So that's something that is table stakes for video conferencing that you don't even know about.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm sure there's a ton more things that just aren't top of mind that can create that friction. So
Right, exactly. If they weren't working like sound, you would be like, this thing doesn't work, it's broken. And people do struggle with that.
yeah, for sure.
But you have to make choices just like Facebook did.
Right, and you have to do kind of leverage or weigh the options of what's more important to have
And I think
that
to
less
one
friction.
side, one side it may be more important to another. The companies that are super well positioned also are the ones that have discrete focus.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Let's start out with a metaphor, right? Because there's some sites that are focused on um,
Mm,
coders collaborating, and other
got it.
sites for people in design to collaborate, and another
Sure.
sites for people to do virtual building inspections using a CAD drawing inside of which they are an avatar. So those companies, well, first of all, they have an advantage in marketing because they're not marketing to the whole world; they're marketing to
A niche.
designers or
Yeah.
contractors or architects, right? So you can
Yeah.
fish where the fish are. Again, it's you can narrow cast it, so to speak. Um, you also get very close to the customers and you can build to order to a certain extent. When
Mhm.
you're building a general purpose site like Spatials or Verbella's, you kind of have to be a Swiss Army knife, if you will. It's easy to make a switchblade. It only has to
Right.
do one thing, which is switch, right? But if
Yeah.
you have a Swiss Army knife, it's got to be a can opener, it's got to be a screwdriver. It's like a smartphone, right? You just expect it to do everything.
Right. And you want everything to work equally as well. So that's another
It should
challenge.
just work.
Right.
Every time it should just work. And that the companies that I like, even though they're probably too sophisticated technically for most people, they do just work and very consistently. And I think that, again, that should be invisible to us, but it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I was going to ask you a question about what you think is next for XR, as well as kind of like what I guess from a marketing perspective, what we should be looking at for either remote collaboration tools or just XR in general. Since you
Well,
are, I mean,
like I said, XR is not quite ready for prime time.
hmm
It's increasing in use, which is great. It's being accelerated from a technology standpoint. Offsetting that are all the supply chain problems that everyone is experiencing. It's
right, yeah,
slowing down the next iPhone. I mean, it's just hard. But the disruption that has happened, and it's going to take a while for it to get back to normal. And then you add to that all of the international relations issues going on between China and the United States, and it
sure,
just makes everything really hard.
yeah,
And it's going to take longer. It's going to take longer to get the devices we want. But I will tell you, the next wave of devices are going to be pretty interesting, right? They're going to be 5G enabled so that you can
mm,
offload a lot of the local computing into the cloud. They're going to have better optics. They're going to be lighter. They're going to have better batteries. All the things that I've complained about, they will address
right,
somewhat. But I do think we're in for a parade of interim devices like the MP3 players before, the iPhone,
right.
right? I mean,
Okay,
I have an iPod that I
right,
never use
right.
because you
It's
just want to have one device, right?
absolutely, yeah.
So I think that we will see in the next 2 or 3 years the Apple's answer to
hmm
AR. It may not be what we think. It may just be a better pair of corrective lenses that gets you wearing Apple technology on your face, and that's it.
Right.
Right? Maybe it
Huh.
interfaces with the phone for sound, and that's it, because they're going to iterate their way into your life.
Got
But
it.
Apple's accessories, like the iWatch, is sold like single-digit percentages, like 3% compared to the iPhone. So these things, as amazing as they are, don't get adopted right away just because Apple is selling them.
Yeah, that's very true.
So we'll see the introduction, but the popularization is going to take years.
That's kind of comes to the end of the questions I have, but
Right.
I wanted to ensure that there was anything I didn't ask that you wanted to share or talk about.
Well, I think that we touched on a lot of the issues in the book. People want to read about remote conferencing and remote collaboration and virtual conferencing. They can go to my column in Forbes
Mhm.
I recently took a giant excerpt of the book and put it out there for free. A lot
I
of
read
companies,
that one. It was pretty informative.
thank you. And yes, so save your $15. Most of the companies that were in the directory inside of the book, which is really the heart of the book, right? It's the
Right.
83 pages of a 140-page book.
Yeah.
So most of those sites and listings are inside of xrdirectory.org, which is a free website. So it's been disaggregated, so to speak, if you wanted to get it for free. You can also buy it at XR Directory, the ebook, share it with your friends. I don't care. Just get it out there. Uh, or you can buy the Kindle edition from Amazon, and I get 2 cents and they get
Uh,
$14.97.
right. Yeah. I did want to actually touch on something that you mentioned, though. The directory I thought was really helpful in the sense that above each page, or each tool, collaboration tool, you have a short snippet of the primary premise
Yeah, we
of the
call that the
collaboration
log
tool.
line.
Ah, there you go. But then it's really easy to kind of skim through all of it and get a quick idea of what each one is, and then if you want to dive further in, you can
Exactly. I
learn
think
about each
it's a
level.
site. It sort of, says breaks things down into rough categories, and if you know what you need, then it's a quick way of looking through everything, right? Because that's, I think, the problem people have is they don't know what they need.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It's a little bit like it's a little bit like when I want to find my wife is Czech, and we recently relocated to LA, so I'm trying to find a Czech restaurant in LA, and so the first thing that comes up is you know Yelp's collection of the 10 best Eastern European restaurants, and it's actually not. It is helpful in a way.
but not what
So
you're looking for.
well, but helpful in a way, and so the book is helpful in a way too. It's like collaboration sites. Yes. What's the alternative to Zoom? What if I don't like Zoom or Zoom isn't meeting my needs? What is there? And
Right.
when I say Zoom, I'm saying Google Meet, I'm
Yeah,
saying
whatever.
Microsoft Teams, all of these, multi uh, chiclet video platforms have the same functionality and are basically the same.
Well, thank you very much, Charlie.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Again, the book is Remote Collaboration, Virtual Conferences, and the Future of Work. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us and
My
giving us
pleasure.
the
Thanks again
insight.
for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
If you liked what you heard on this episode of Listen In, please drop us a note at listenin@eisenberg.com. Share your insights and let us know if you'd like to be a guest on the show. You'll always find the full version of each episode of Listen In here on AList. And please always think who you know that might benefit by these insights and share this episode with them. And don't forget, please like us before you go.